Hello and welcome back to Cuckoo for Books. My name is Salva and today I am at the Jasmine, Warga, and Jennifer E. Smith book signing. I am this close to getting my book signed, so I'll check in with you guys later.
Fans, please join me in welcoming Jennifer E. Smith and Jasmine Warga.
The book started, I unexpectedly lost somebody really close to me, and so I was thinking a lot about sort of these like really big, weighty existential questions that I think we don't often let ourselves think that much about, and sometimes in periods of really raw shock or really deep grief, we start to think about sort of our own mortality and what it means to live and what it means to die. And Zelle's story, you know, was born out of that, and then I started to realize that I was writing about these topics that have been something that have sort of affected my life and affected other people that I love. But I wrote it in a really frenzied period. I wrote it in a period where I was only writing it for myself, and I was writing it to kind of, you know, grapple with my grief, and it was a way, so it's not about my friend, and it's definitely not really about grief, but it was a way for me to address these questions that were sort of haunting me. And so I didn't realize at the time when I was writing it that the subject matter was considered at all taboo, and I didn't really realize I was writing a book, you know, about suicidal ideation or about depression. I know that sounds ludicrous because obviously that's a vehicle of the plot, but to me I was writing this girl's story, and I was writing this girl who was sort of grappling with these like bigger questions. And so once the book was finished, and it wasn't really until closer to the publication date that I began to realize that this was like a thing, subject matter of the book. But I feel really grateful to sort of have been initiated into this community and getting to speak about this issue, because I feel now more passionately than ever that it's something that needs to be talked about more, and I think there needs to be more awareness of.
I once wrote a middle grade book called The Storm Makers that actually is fantasy, which was kind of a one-off for me. It was an experiment because I've only ever written one kind of book and one kind of genre, and I wanted to just try something new. And it was really fun. But I think my heart is kind of in contemporary fiction. It's what I grew up reading. It's what I read now. It's what I love to write. I think of it like being left-handed or right-handed. You're just sort of drawn to one or the other, and you can kind of learn the other. But for me, it's that. I think if I, at this point in my career, if I sort of expand, it would probably be more in terms of age group than genre. Like, I'd love to write another middle grade that's contemporary. I'd love to write an adult book. I'd love to try writing a screenplay at some point, and just continue to sort of stretch and challenge myself with different forms and perspectives. But I think there's enough drama in reality for me.
Yeah, my answer, so I'll be brief because it's really similar to Jen's, is that I think I've always been drawn to reading contemporary novels, and I think in terms of genre, where I maybe would be a little different is I'm interested sort of in experimental styles, different ways to format a novel, definitely playing around with age group, possibly sometime wanting to play around with doing a verse novel. I think that would be the area where I would like stretch myself, but I think sometimes you have to play to your strengths, and I think to write speculative fiction you have to be a really good plotter, and that's probably my weakest skill as a writer, and so I definitely shy away from that. I'll sometimes have like an idea that's like more high concept, and then I'm like, how do people write? Like, where would you go from there? Like, it just seems so overwhelming. And I'm like, I need to keep it really contained. But it's also, I think, it does reflect the type of reader that I am, and I think that I like to think of writing as a conversation, and so the way to participate in the conversation, you obviously have to listen to the books that I've listened to primarily tend to be contemporary fiction. Yes, well, thank you so much, and it's a lovely summer. I missed all that way to describe it. So this book was really, really difficult for me to write. It was the hardest thing I've ever written. I'm hoping it will stay the hardest thing that I've ever written, and that I always had had this fantasy that once I got an agent, once I got an editor, that it was going to be so easy to write. And it ended up being the exact opposite, because I had all these voices in my head. And this is before this book came out, so I don't mean like really voices from readers, but I had like a lot of, I guess, internal fears about disappointing them, that they've been wrong to take this chance on me, they've been wrong to offer me sort of this blank slate. And I also think because of the subject matter of my friend Ella Beckles, I was approaching writing a novel from what proved to be a really counterproductive way to do it, which is I was like, wow, like I wrote this book about this really like weighty subject. What's another weighty subject that I have feelings about? Like, let me write a book about it. And it turns out it's a really unproductive way to write a novel. And so around the time my friend Ella Beckles came out, I was doing like kind of press stuff like this and doing different interviews, and I got asked to do this interview where I needed to write about the top 5 records that have meant the most to me in my life. And I had so much fun writing that blog post. I just loved it, and I was like, wow, I don't actually hate writing, like, which is what I had thought for the past couple of months. And I was like, I should really write about music. That's something that meant like a lot to me as a young person, and still means a lot to me. And then this light bulb went off. I was like, what if this girl has been writing letters to her favorite rock star for years and he's never answered them, and he shows up on her doorstep? And so at that was just this inkling of an idea. At the time, he wasn't her dad. None of that had been mapped out. I was just trying to figure out, why would the rock star show up now? What does that mean? What does it mean to be a fan of somebody's work? Does that mean that you actually know them? Like, where's the line? Because I think the more and more, like, the internet has made it so much more open that we have such more access to these people we admire, and I think there can be this feeling that you think you really know them because you've listened to all these interviews with them, you've followed them on social media. I mean, I so fall into that trap that I start to think of these people almost as like my friends, that I know them. And so I was really interested in exploring like where that line is, and also where that line of like idealization comes in. Like, can you still love somebody's work ultimately if they've like disappointed you on a personal level? So those were all the things that were in my mind when I started to write it. And so but I think I had to like get back to what I kind of touched on earlier, that for me, novels start with a character that has a question. And that's something that I learned through the long haul of trying to write a book without approaching it from that angle.
If you've read any of my other novels, you know that I'm drawn to very similar themes. I really like exploring fate and timing and chance and serendipity, I think even when I set out to write a novel about something totally different, like this is where I end up, because you know, maybe there are only so many big questions in the world, but there's a finite number of, you know, there's an infinite number of ways to answer them, and I continue to try to answer my same questions in different stories about in different, you know, situations. So I love moments in time that act as hinges, days where there's a really clear split between the before and after. So yesterday your life was one way, tomorrow your life is different. And the lottery is just such a good example of that. And so I'd been wanting to write about it for ages, and I couldn't find a way into the story because I thought, you know, it's hard to, when you're talking about the lottery, you're dealing with issues of money and class, and I was thinking families. I was thinking one family wins the lottery and another doesn't, and they're close, so something changes, and it just didn't seem that interesting to me. But I knew there was something to the lottery idea. And then one day I was in New York City where I live, and I was standing in line at a bodega at a convenience store behind this really young guy who was buying, like, it was like one of the times when the lottery pool is so big that everyone's lined up to buy tickets, and he was buying just a lot of tickets. And I thought, God, that's what I want to write about. A kid who wins when he's 18, still hasn't quite figured out who he is yet wins this incredibly huge amount of money. Hi, Dan. And I wanted to tell it from the point of view of the person who sets the whole thing in motion and has something to lose for that happening, because she's been in love with her best friend for years, and him winning is this huge dream come true for him, and she's the one who did it. At the same time, it's the thing that's kind of carrying him further away from her and changing everything, and she's somebody who's very averse to change for some really valid reasons. So it was, I thought a lot about perspective, like, do you write it from the point of view of the winner, do you write it from somebody slightly outside of it? And I think having that perspective of the person that's watching it happen to somebody else actually was more interesting to me in a way. So I can't remember if that answered your question, but that was just a lot of things I said.
You know, I grew up and I didn't see someone who looked like me or had the same cultural background as me in a book until I was way, you know, out of high school. I don't even really remember when the first time I encountered like a Middle Eastern female was, and they were probably a side character, but I do remember in college reading this book called The Professor's Daughter, and the main character, she was biracial, and she was half black, half white, which is obviously a different background than me, but just to have this character who was talking about these things that I felt so long, like having one toe in one world and one toe in another world, and I was just like, wow, is this what it's like for people all the time? Like, read books about people who reflect them. So I think that it's so important for us to write books that, you know, reflect the world that we live in. That said, I think the beautiful thing about reading is learning to empathize with people that are different from you. And so for me, I think it was still valuable, my reading experience as a kid, to read about people who came from different socioeconomic classes than me, people who are of different racial identity than me, people who lived in a different part of the country or world than me. So, sorry, this is a really messy answer, because I think about this a lot, and I was recently reading an interview with a writer I admire a lot, Zadie Smith, and her first book was really buzzy because it was really diverse and it reflected this part of London that they were like, oh my gosh, you're writing about diverse London, and she kind of had bristled at that and was like, I'm just writing about the neighborhood that I grew up in. I'm not writing from like an activist point of view, and so I think about that. I think there's two tenets to this sort of new movement in diversity, and one is which people are just trying to write about the world that they live in and they see, and I think I fall into that category. So like my books, both of which feature main protagonists of color, and here we are now, her best friend is gay, and these are just all situations that felt very natural to me from the world that I live in. And then I think there's a way to write fiction in which you're like purposely, really actively thinking about wanting to put diverse characters in. And I think that's also valid, but I think those are two different things. I think there's a way to write the world in which you want to see it and to write the world that you see. So like for me, a lot of my characters are the only brown person in the story besides their family, because that was the environment that I grew up in, and I felt like very othered by that environment, and so that's like a rich narrative feeling for me to dig into. And Mindy Kaling, I don't know if her show is popular here in Minnesota, she got a lot of criticism at one point for her show where they were like, you're the only person of like color and every other doctor is white, and she's like, that's kind of how I grew up, that's like what I thought, that's my character, it's not my job to like write the world the way that like now we have decided we want to see it. And so I think that I think more representation is good. I think more voices from all different like walks of life are good, because I always feel like I am not like shouldn't be representative of all Middle Eastern teenagers, and you know, I want there to be lots more voices, because then that makes me feel more free to write like flawed characters. And then the last thing I'll say is that, like, and I can only speak to my own small corner of identity, but you know, I think brown people know what it's like to be brown, like poor people know what it's like to be poor, and I think we need more books that aren't like about the issue of identity, but are just like Katniss happens to be brown, or Harry Potter happens to be Asian, or you know, Bella happens to be gay, or something where it's not like the specific identity isn't what the book runs on. And I remember, because I bristled a lot, like when my heart came out, I got some reviews where they're like, why is she even Turkish? Like that's not something that's like explored in the book, or the Turkish identity is just like kind of an afterthought. And it's like, it's not an afterthought, that's her identity, but I don't feel that it's the book's job to be like a cultural introduction to this. And if somebody, like, you don't, books like about Irish Americans aren't put under that kind of scope that they're supposed to be this cultural tour guide. So all of this is to say, I think it's a really, really exciting movement, and I want to see more books by voices that, you know, haven't been heard, that need to be amplified. I want to see books that more thoroughly, I think, reflect the world that we live in.
I think there are there's been a lot of progress and a lot of discussion, but not enough, and it's really great to see the strides that have been made, and hopefully that will continue to happen. And I think, speaking as somebody who also used to work in publishing, it's not just it starts from the top, right? You need more diverse editors, you need more diverse agents, because it's not that there are diverse voices out there writing amazing books. You've seen so many amazing, like, wonderful examples of books just be very successful lately, and that's amazing, but there are so many more out there, and they might not be getting discovered because there's also, there's not enough diversity kind of all the way through publishing. So I think that is something that people are starting to recognize and starting to make an effort to change. I also think, as a white person, for me, part of my job is to support and read and amplify diverse voices, and so I just am always trying to read as widely as possible and amplify those voices. So I think the basis of it all is that for a long time books haven't really reflected the world as it actually is, and it's great to see that starting to change, but there's a long way to go too. It was one of the books that was the hardest for me to write in a lot of ways. It was a challenge because it's a bit kind of bigger and deeper in scope than some of my other books. There's a bigger cast of characters. It's a longer book. It delves into a lot of kind of more serious issues, as well as having that kind of fate and romance aspect to it as well. So I mean, I don't know what the hardest part, one of the parts that was most interesting to me was talking a lot about the characters' sort of worldviews. I think when you talk about winning the lottery, there's a conversation to be had about, so in the book, the two main characters have both had a lot of misfortune in their lives, and it brings up a lot of good questions of, if something good happens to you, are you waiting for the other shoe to drop? If something bad happens to you, are you automatically do something good? Is the world entirely random, or do things happen for a reason? And it was really interesting to use the three main characters, Alice, Hetty, and Leo, and their kind of differing, views because of their differing backgrounds, to explore those questions. And I kind of came into it thinking, I was always a really firm believer that things happen for a reason, but then you take a character like Alice, whose parents died a year apart from each other when she was younger, and she's thinking, well, there can't be a reason for that, because why would that happen? And so it was almost like having a debate with myself through these other characters. Like, you have like one person who's thinking one thing and one thinking the other, and I wasn't exactly sure how it felt, so I was arguing both sides, and that made it it brought a depth to the book that was really a challenge to write, and made it really satisfying. So I'm really proud of it. I was about to say it was really fun to write, but it was really hard to write, but I'm really proud of it.
I think my agent once said to me that the skeleton key that sort of unlocks all good writing is specificity, and so the more specific you can make something, the more universal it seems, and that really made like a light bulb go off for me, that even just a few extra words that add a little bit of texture to how something like tastes or smells or looks can really just like change the whole feel of a book, because and so I think that that's sort of along the lines of, I always hear people say like dig deeper, which I think is that same idea of just like trying to not beat the surface level. And then the last thing that I always think about when I was in school for writing, people would always say like, if it's not on the page, it doesn't matter. And so I think about that a lot. It doesn't matter like if you think that's there or understandable, if the reader's just like, that doesn't make sense, or I don't get why this is happening, or I'm not following, it doesn't matter that you did. So I think about that a lot, that if it's not on the page, it doesn't matter, what you thought.
One thing that a writer friend of mine once told me that I think about a lot, it sounds incredibly basic, and it is, but that's why it's such good advice, is just you have to write the book you want to write. And I think often, especially once you've written a certain amount of books, either your publisher wants a certain kind of thing, or the market seems to be going a certain way, or your fans, want a certain type of book, and or you're just writing a book that you think you should be doing, and if it's not feeling quite right, you know, it's sometimes hard to change course, but it's something that, it's almost like a check-in that I do with myself at various stages of the project. Is this the book I want to write? Am I, you know, enjoying it is a strong word, because sometimes, you know, a dream job is still a job, and writing, sometimes, the heartbeat underneath it all is love of what you do, but sometimes, of course, it's hard to sit in the seat and write. So it's not that you should always be enjoying it, but there should be a kind of feeling that you're on the right path, and it's good to kind of check in, because I've definitely abandoned projects like 100 pages in because it no longer feels like the right thing to be doing, which is a rough time in a process to realize that, but you have to write the book you want to write.
Thank you very much. You guys are the best readers in the world, and I was so delighted and overwhelmed and happy to be here, so thank you.
I couldn't be happier to be back. It is such a privilege. I feel like I've spent the last 3 years telling everybody how awesome the Philippines is and how amazing the readers are, and to get a chance to come back, I feel like the luckiest author in the world, so thank you.
And that about does it for my Jennifer E. Smith and Jasmine Warga in PH recap. I'm losing words. You can follow me on my other bookish adventures on Twitter and Instagram, both at Cuckoo for Books, and I will see you guys very soon. Bye guys!